The portrait is a mask which is wrought with the utmost attention being paid to preserving a likeness in regard to both its shape and its contour. Displaying these portraits at public sacrifices, they honor them in a spirit of emulation, and when a prominent member of the family dies, they carry them in the funeral procession, putting them on those who seem most like the deceased in size and build. Polybius. Chapter 3. When Bigfoot Met Billie Jean. The Cape blocks out everything to the south and east, and a miles-long sand spit means that travel north must be by foot or beach bike. Of course, west is out of the question. All that connects this place to the others is a road that rolls through, over, and around a knot of hills broken here and there by clear cuts and a few swamps, pastures, and cranberry bogs. These are among my favorite of all places, those that seem to be cut off so thoroughly from the others that it is a psychological atmosphere unto itself, like a dream. The beach at Cape Lookout isn't really a surfing beach. The Cape juts 2 miles into the ocean, disrupting the waves on either side, shifting sand as natural jetty and changing the behavior of the adjacent waves. Here the waves tumble in one after another, and all the time, there often isn't even enough space between waves for a surfer to become launched, even if the waves were rideable for bodyboarding. However, it is ideal. The car alarms of city dwellers rise in various quarters of various campgrounds all summer long. Both the pre-dawn and post-dusk darkness is pierced by cars screaming for their lives in the easily jolted parking spots of nature, choking perhaps on clean air to which they are unaccustomed. City sounds are predictable patterns broken frequently by the unexpected. Beach sounds are always rhythmic, the pace seldom changing and doing so only slowly. The pace is slower and steadier, more like a heartbeat than a symphony, more the pounding drums of headhunters than Rhapsody in Blue. I stopped to watch a heron hunt in a lake. The bird evolved a slender head and neck that to a fish under the surface of the water looks like nothing but a twig. It holds its head at a 45-degree angle, its rubbery neck coiled in an S shape until it makes a darting attack, a noiseless, surgical strike. It throws its head back to gulp down its victim. The hunt itself is all serenity and patience. Herons shy away from sudden noises and motion and are quick to fly off on their wide blue wings no matter how plentiful the food. These are birds so secretive that watching them hunt in broad daylight feels like a violation of some sort, like a filthy act. If there was something to the west of Oregon, I would have gone there instead. The edge is permanent but it shifts, revealing bonus land for us to explore, extra manifest destiny left in the national tank. New territory is being created exceedingly slowly. If we would be patient, new land would be created by natural geological forces, but no, waiting is not in our national character. A few thousand years hence, all of these villages and beaches will have been pushed into new high and dry foothills, and new villages will rise to replace them, presumably, a few miles west of here. I wonder if the beaches will still look the same, or if they will be unrecognizable. I hope I am never asked to talk on TV. It seems to me that people who want others to talk on TV are really just looking for a soundbite. So if I were asked to talk on TV, here is what I would say in response. Here's my soundbite. If I wanted to talk on TV, I'd write a book called I Want to Talk on TV. Even Lewis and Clark took note of the relative scarcity of bears and wolves on this coast, but then, they had just descended from the Rocky Mountains. They noted too the utter absence of grizzlies. As for wolves, I'd have met at least one. A couple I happened to meet in the mountains one day had a purebred wolf on a choke chain. Its sky blue eyes knocked me right over, as wolves' eyes always do. Although they claim it was domesticated, I suspect there really is no telling where it may have come from, or how wild it is. It's a mongrel, a word based on the Old English word mong, meaning mixture. It seems domesticated, but it reserves for itself the austere beastliness typical of purebred wolves. I've heard it often enough to say it is simply a thing that happens a lot, has probably happened since before humans were even humans. When a group of girls gets together in a campground, a screaming match often follows. They sound like shrill songbirds testing one another's songs. They all scream at once. Then each girl presumably takes a turn. The screams are staggered and are performed solo. Such screaming matches can, and do, last up to an hour. Boys rarely limit their competitions to such nonsense, although I have seen punching matches, rock-throwing skirmishes, feats of urination and the like. The laughter of other campers and the song of the Swainson's thrush are similar. I recognize the laughter of a specific camper when I hear it here and there over the course of a few days, in the same way I hear the thrush's upscale, downscale song and become familiar with its peculiarities, the way it cuts out at the high end for a specific bird and breaks low for another. The voices of others, if one makes no effort to comprehend the meanings of the words and listens only to the sound of the screams and shouts, the whispers and steady rhythms of a conversation on low boil, can be appreciated merely on those terms, as mere emanations of nature. These after all are the natural exclamations of human animals. Some campers have especially unique laughs. One week a family camps somewhere nearby in the campground. I never quite figure out where exactly, as it seems to be all over the place, and I am surprised several times throughout each day, all week long, by the laughter of a boy who sounds exactly like Ralphie's little brother from the movie A Christmas Story. It is like a woodchuck on lithium. The most effervescent noise I think I have ever heard coming from human vocal cords. I smile all the time now, just remembering it. I am somewhat jealous of his parents, classmates, and siblings, who don't have to imagine at all. The King of Death. I get the news on a Friday afternoon during pointless time, a gorgeous summer day, and I slump in a seat in front of a flickering computer screen, mindlessly clicking a mouse. I am recovering from a bout of back spasms by surfing the internet, but it is a flimsy excuse. In truth I am doing nothing and thinking nothing. The dog days having descended early on to a pre-vegetabilized me, the once and future and all time king of the lazy. Michael Jackson couldn't be much closer to the last thing on my mind if he tried, as irrelevant to me today as my winter glass and wool cap. But the sudden news of his death at home in Los Angeles earlier in the day utterly changes the course of it. Both my solidly entrenched laziness and the time warp to come, the course of the whole upcoming weekend. At this moment the news flashes around the world, doing the same thing to people everywhere, and there is no escaping it. No way out, no way through, no avoiding the funk to come. I pull on my best pair of sandals and go out into the sunshine for the evening. I beat it. The campground is in a small town, actually, It is little more than a fragile smear of houses along the edge of the bay next to a jetty, not so small as to be insignificant, but small enough to feel like a self-contained place within and unto itself, like a stage, or rather, it is next to a town, or wedged between two towns. It is hard to pin its location down more precisely, a very Michael Jacksonish kind of town in that regard if no others. His music videos tending to feature as they do generic stand-ins for cities, ideas for places, in other words, more so than actual ones. But the news travels faster than I do. The first few beats I hear cause me to turn my head, as those beats always do. The unmistakable first half-second of Billie Jean slithers out of an opened car window like a whiff of smoke from the set of the Thriller video, and I'm instantly back in 1982, prowling the streets of my hometown, or something like it, like a pop culture zombie, and I am not alone. Like fireflies, the tunes begin to rise from every campsite, from every backyard in the neighborhood around it, although sprinkled here and there can be found a few more recent hits and some suddenly startling Jackson 5 tunes. The boy's voice is one that does not belong to a boy, and the boy himself sounds truly heartbroken. On this of all days, it is Thriller that I can hear so clearly that I begin to slip in time like Billy Pilgrim. I hear a fake conversation in my head that begins with "Last one back in time is a rotten egg" and ends with "Gag me" and "for sure." Thriller has always sounded the same to me every time I've heard it. It always has the same sizzle and thump, a beat that by its ubiquity was infused into me when I was a kid, like Bugs Bunny. The way Thriller sounds as an album, in a basic, aesthetic, danceable sense, is unlike any other album I know. To modern ears it sounds overproduced, but I think it is a genuine cultural touchstone of the type that don't come around often, a touchstone for me not only in cultural memory but in personal memory as well. If the memory of my childhood has a soundtrack, somewhere in the mix, perhaps only as omnipresent background noise but no less funky or sleek, is a scratched-up copy of Thriller rotating under a needle at 33 revolutions per minute. It is what I am hearing now. Today, on the day of his rock death, it is easy to remember when Michael Jackson was more than just a performer and Thriller was more than an album. From the utter blue of irrelevancy, young boy Jackson, now grown, now dead, returns to the pop cultural center ground he cleared not with musical skill, although he was never lacking there, but with advertising, image-making and unmaking and remaking and unremaking, and the ruthless branding of a presidential candidate or multinational conglomerate, or both. The time of his greatest glory was, and perhaps still is, the time when Michael Jackson became global royalty, befriending and marrying princesses of other international regal bloodlines, acquiring jesters and freaks for sideshows and accumulating their greatest artifacts as tribute. Jackson became, for a short while in 1982-83, a pop god. It was the point at which the flash and shine of the celebrity spectacle had yet to fully dissolve into the 24-hour white noise of now. Western mass culture, standing in the spotlight of world mass culture by default, at least during the era, was becoming more and more industrialized and efficient, having rebuilt in the wake of earlier explosions, Elvis Presley's TNT bomb, the Beatles' atomic bomb, and even the Sex Pistols' hydrogen bomb, to discover a nice surprise in Jackson's neutron bomb, which wiped out all other artists but left the infrastructure of the industry standing. Here is an oversimplification, of course, but then one doesn't go to pop music for complexity. At this point a line needs to be drawn between rock and pop. Pop is anything that looks good. The image of the pop star is everything. The music he or she makes, or is supposed to have made, virtually nothing. Rock is ugly and abusive, a fire that cannot be contained and burns too brightly to last very long, but tends to be more profound in its effects on listeners. Rock can change the course of a fan's life. Pop can only change spending habits and weekends. Thriller was once considered pop, but I think it can now be classified as rock. Rock music seems to always sound the way it used to sound, and it will sound the same again now, and it seems to always be fundamentally about the same topics of love, sex, drugs, fast cars, guns, and rock itself, like the same hit record stuck on repeat, forever. When rock music, virtually indistinguishable it seems from world music, or even just music, at this late, semi-drunk stage in the long cultural joyride left over from the 20th century and fueling itself on simple inertia, runs out of places to go, it creates them. That is, rock makes a home for itself. It seems like all of this has happened before. Elvis Presley's death has been called surprising, but I think this is partially due to a hangover effect caused by the only other 50s-era rocker to die, rock death that shook, rattled, and rolled so many fans so hard, that of Buddy Holly, which truly was shocking. But by the end of his life, Elvis was hardly anyone's picture of health. Overweight and hooked on a cocktail of barbiturates and junk food, the king in the mid-70s wasn't long for this world, and he looked it. Another, later rock death was also both genuinely shocking and tragic, the assassination of John Lennon in 1981. The outpouring of grief around the world was compounded for fans by the fact that one of the Beatles was murdered by one of them. Deranged Holden Caulfield wannabe or not, Jackson's death has some of the looming inevitability of Elvis's. Jackson's doctor will be blamed for his administration of the drugs the pop star has been long addicted to, if the tabloid talking heads are right, but with the media friendliness and prime-time appeal of Lennon's, which was first announced to the world at the tail end of a nationally televised football game. News of Lennon's death spawned Beatles marathons even on country and Motown radio stations. Part of New York's Central Park near the hotel outside of which Lennon was shot was set aside and dedicated as strawberry fields in his memory. The grief was real, and so was the rest of it. Strawberry Fields is still there, might be there forever, or close enough to satisfy me, and so is the hotel. The morning goes on, each anniversary of the moment sparks more Beatles marathons and retrospectives. The replays of Kozel's announcement in both oral and visual form are like Charlie Brown cartoons, in the way they appear each year at the same time, that grow ever more bittersweet and abstract the further we get in time from the 60s. It is too soon to know how Jackson's rock death will be commemorated. It's only just happened, but in a few days celebrities will converge for a once-in-a-lifetime funerary spectacle that I will miss because I won't really care about it anymore. The kind of made-for-TV self-adoration to be staged a few days hence couldn't be less relevant, will be as unsettling and vacuous as it always is when mass culture talks to itself in small words. What interests me is the scene in the campground, in the little town I'm in today. What matters, as Jackson himself surely knew when he recorded Thriller in the studio, is the word on the street. I like Michael Jackson's music when I hear it, which isn't often. Aside from what now seems to have been a brief period of interest in pop music between the ages of 8 and 12, about the right age, it seems to me, I haven't been paying close attention. Strolling around I still mostly hear Thriller and the follow-up Bad more than anything else, but some girls in one campsite are dancing to something that sounds newish but I don't recognize the songs, just the plaintive voice and superfluous grunts and squeals. Unmistakable Jackson. An old hippie drives through the campground in a beat-up Monte Carlo, clad in tie-dyes, blaring ABC. I have to smile. It is the automatic soul in little Michael's voice, even at age 5. It may still be the last day of his life, but he sounds okay to me. It is not morbid curiosity that guides me, but the spontaneously generated, unpredictable and completely unsteered social phenomenon I see. This morning we were planning a generic summer weekend at the beach. Now we're all firmly locked into an 80s flashback weekend, roving Jacksonites, all of us bad, and off the wall, and dangerous, a makeshift community of politic Captain EOS, the Pepsi Generation version 2.0, and the headlines read, "The day the music came back to life, sort of." I keep walking around, and I begin to look for ancient clues. Although the ancients lacked bona fide pop stars, Alexander the Great might do as an example from Western culture, an ultimate baseline for historical comparison of rock deaths. As one-time ruler of the known world, again, from a strictly Western perspective, he subsumes any artist or philosopher of his day, even Aristotle, because tyrants subsume all in a time of tyranny, which his surely was. The death of Alexander is also useful because we get 2 deaths for the price of 1, another pale shade of off-grade for contrast. Alexander's best friend forever Hephaestion, a friend in the truest sense, as easily linked in death as they were in life, died 8 months prior to Alexander, while they were tooling around Darius III's Persian Empire. Alexander's immediate reaction was to have Hephaestion's doctor killed and to declare himself a god. The Macedonian Senate, tongues firmly in cheeks, issued the proclamation. The new god Alexander staged a flamboyant funeral for his friend, with elaborate games and artistic and athletic competitions. The celebratory funeral no doubt masked a personal pain that was surely real, and Alexander slipped into a depression that, combined with alcohol, nagging injuries, a bevy of tropical diseases borne by insects and filth, not to mention the overwork of ruling the known world, would soon do him in as well. His death at age 32 could be considered mildly shocking, even considering the primitive conditions and relative paucity of medical information of the day. But those around him could have seen the end approaching as clearly as those around Elvis, as clearly as those around Jackson. A massive struggle for the future of Western civilization erupted after Alexander's death, but things seem pretty calm here. In fact, they're beautiful. Beautiful the way morning vigils can be beautiful, in a tourist-swollen small town free of the glitzy self-consolation of LA, and the cheesy spectacle of too public grief, beautiful like the morning of true fans, with thoughts that wander with the radio playlists of the man who tonight is the best singer in the universe. I can't get over how good Thriller sounds to me tonight. I can't get over the fact that the weekend is changed forever, and all he had to do was die. I am sad, but I am celebrating. Thriller sounds like someone crawled inside the decade, captured a pocket of time in a thermos and made it into an album. It sounds like the 80s because it made them, and not only by its music. All the boys try to look like Michael Jackson, all the girls, too. Some schools resorted to banning the wearing of a single glove, only pairs were permitted. Photographs of reclining pop stars on the fronts of album jackets were a staple of the late 70s and early 80s, but it is Jackson's serious coolness that has become the icon. There is an aura about him. Today it appears ghostly, jerry curls casually but precisely dribbling down his forehead, and a human-looking nose. His expression is that of Mona Lisa. It is nowhere close to a smile, nor is it close to a scowl, nor is it blank. Today, it is both tragic and completely natural. Michael Jackson in 1982, reclining against an unseen object, looking at the camera with impossible sincerity. That's how I want to remember him, not as a pop king, but as a pop god. And how often does a pop god die? We have to boil the issue down to a matter of degrees, there being so few genuine pop gods to compare. Here's the math oversimplified, and even by the most vaporous and vacuous standards, Michael Jackson is at the top of the list. The phrase "death of Michael Jackson" racks up almost 3 million hits on Google. For comparison, death of John Lennon scores 250,000. And death of Buddy Holly nets a mere 50,000. When a rock star dies, it is that they will never again make music, will never again have the joy of unwrapping a new CD and popping the pristine, lidless disc into our machine. That is why we weep, that rock stars reach us through both music and words, a double tap to the aesthetic and emotional solar plexus. We end up with broken hearts that ache harder in the morning, when we wake up to the new reality. Overdoses and suicides, unless there are aggravating circumstances more interesting than utter incompetence or more circumstantial than mere rumors of murder, are supremely boring as rock deaths go. Car crashes are boring unless the victim is sober and obeying the traffic laws. Plane and helicopter and boat crashes are always good, the more random the better, there being usually also plenty of room for conspiracy theories and speculations about destinies fulfilled or left undone. These last have the added appeal of genuine human tragedy, which can't always be said. Murders, especially when committed during band meetings or on stage, are sure to guarantee unsubstantiated speculation and, therefore, longevity. On the subject of longevity, Elvis, Jackson, and presumably every rock star to die for the rest of time will be able to compete for a new record, to find out which corpse can flog the most products. Elvis's songs have been used to sell everything from bubblegum to washing machines since his demise, as has Lennon's. It is too soon to know how Jackson's memory and music will be abused for corporate purposes, but it's surely coming. Beat It would seem to lend itself to a cornucopia of products, as would Man in the Mirror, and Don't Stop Till You Get Enough would seem to be custom-made for ad campaigns that attempt to make gluttony a virtue, such as those targeted tactlessly at bacon lovers. Decorum, even morbid pop decorum, dictates that some time must pass before cross-marketed advertising campaigns can officially begin. But given the readiness with which Jackson embraced commercialism in life, literal commercialism, in this case, my guess is that in about 3 years we will see an onslaught of macabre marketing angles, Gen X nostalgic overload and a tight pair of Jacko's Billy Blue jeans. Just ask Nat King Cole. In the spirit of the 80s, I plan to just say no. When ancient Romans celebrated the life of the recently deceased, if they were prominent citizens and the family could afford it, They hired a performer called an Octopus. These actors would have studied the habits of their subjects by watching them go about their business in the forum so that when they died they could perform a convincing impression. We can imagine that many of these players might have honed their impressions by satirizing in life the prominent men that they would eventually be honoring in death. Michael Jackson hardly needs one, not only because of the ubiquity of his image, plastered as it still is all over global media, but also because of the profusion of imitators who have already used it to mock him and have hounded him with it his entire life. To be fair, he was a celebrity with a distinctive personality with distinctive mannerisms and speech, which in America makes one an automatic target for imitation, just as his singing style and voice have spawned countless rip-off acts that still inhabit the pop village he built more or less by virtue of his talent first, his now somewhat tarnished image second. Unlike the formalized images created by the Egyptians and the Greeks, the Romans alive during the Republic sought realistic depictions of themselves through their sculpture. When we look at a bust of Julius Caesar, we are looking at a sculpture meant to precisely resemble him. In essence, we are looking at him as we look at a photo. The details probably almost as accurate to real life as, say, Matthew Brady's portrait of Abraham Lincoln. When a prominent member of a noble Roman family died, their marble bust was carried in the funeral procession by a family member or an Octopus, perhaps partially concealed beneath a robe such that only the bust carried on his shoulders could be seen. It would thus appear as if the recently deceased had risen and was partaking in his own funeral parade. When the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire, the precise realism to which sculpture had evolved, going so far as to depict wrinkles and warts, was suddenly a dilemma. Beginning with the living god Augustus, idealized fictions began to enter the medium. After all, who ever heard of a god with wrinkles and warts? And because the emperor's image was everywhere, not only on coins and tapestries and mosaics, but on mass-produced figurines that average Romans kept, and presumably sometimes prayed to, in their own homes, a single idealized vision of the emperor carved in marble, pending his approval, of course, was reproduced ad nauseam, without variation. All room for personal expression by the sculptor was impinged, and the era of propaganda was begun. Here too is why there are no depictions of Augustus Caesar, a man who ruled to a great old age and made an empire, as an old man. Octavian Augustus Caesar is forever young, indeed. I am preoccupied this weekend by a fantasy about my own childhood, more or less the same as it was the first time but now transferred to this small town in this small town summer. Pop-top aluminum cans and Pac-Man fever, skateboarding boardwalks in daylight, skinny dipping moonlit bays at midnight. I see the ballpark where I failed miserably at Pony League Baseball, the community pool where my older brother's friends held me under too long, the spot under the lifeguard stand where I stole my first kiss, time travel by pop culture cliché, myself a cultural chrononaut, a tourist of both time and space, living like Doctor Who. The moment is as ripe as it will ever be for a moonwalk, a dance move I taught myself when I was 10. I haven't attempted dancing of any sort in years, but something about the day makes me want to try again. I bust a few moves for strangers. I even try to teach a few of the younger ones, who are mystified at first, the way we all were circa 1982, but the illusion wears off after I show them how it works. My faulty back starts to scream at me again about halfway through my first moonwalk, a dance devised by someone with rubber hips. Jackson may have learned it from a lifetime's collection of showbiz friends. I learned it from a long-playing album to which the needle of my turntable would never remain stuck, bouncing as it did along with my bedroom floor. The album was called So You Want to Break Dance, or something equally stupid. We're all having fun until a kid from Japan shows up. He is camping with family or friends. He speaks no English, so I'll never know, and has mastered breakdancing somehow, for reasons I have difficulty imagining. It is possible he learned from a dancing-based video game, but he can even moonwalk better than I can. Why must that be necessary? He dances literal circles around me. As he does so, the kids of total strangers gaze at him in awe, as they had gazed in my direction before he showed up. He evokes gasps and laughter, admiration and respect. He is the life of the party, the hero of my now aborted time travel fantasy, way better than I will ever be, and my back aches ever more acutely just watching him, and so I will never moonwalk again. The king of pop is dead. Postscript: this essay is only a cheap cover version of a classic, and a self-conscious one at that, even going so far as to borrow a metaphorical riff or two. I owe much in this essay to the writing of cultural critic Greil Marcus, still among the living, who first introduced me to the concept of rock death through his books, all of which I highly recommend. An essay Marcus wrote at the end of the decade called Rock Death in the 1970s, a sweepstakes which brilliantly ranks nearly all of them, is among the most obvious thefts herein perpetrated. Marcus's writing is like this. I feel compelled to hum along. Bigfoot 1, of Skookums and Skeptics. Primeval forests, it is unsurprising, have a primitive effect on the mind. In the half-lit glades of the deepest forests, the mind is easily tricked into seeing the trees shift slightly, just a brief flash of shadowy movement at the edge of vision. They vanish when an attempt is made to see them. Indians of the area call these spirits skookum, a word that maintains its magic among the long-established families, Anglo and otherwise, of the Pacific Northwest. At what is now known as Devil's Lake, entrepreneurial Indians once wove stories, for the benefit of Californians gone up the coast for a holiday weekend, about demonic creatures that emerged from the lake to feed from time to time on those self-same tourists. Naturally, if the legend of Bigfoot had emerged in its time and place as it did, something very much like it would have. The psychological aura, not to mention the economics of the tourist industry, demand it. Bigfoot, or someone like him, is inevitable. The Bigfoot myth not only satisfies the human need to be scared shitless for fun, but it clicks neatly into the history and potential future history of the place, a legend demanded by the place itself and manifested in its people, are a perfect union. But herein begins to creep doubt. The strongest evidence against the existence of Bigfoot isn't that no one has managed to shoot one and drag its hairy hide, or at least a handful of fur, to a bona fide scientist, in a nation teeming with guns, as well as taxidermists, meat processing plants, veterinaries, and good old-fashioned police officers, but the utter lack of evidence in the fossil record. If Bigfoot really were present or indeed has ever been, Bigfoot kind would have left behind fossilized bones and skulls by the barrelful, just like every other species to have inhabited the two American continents since prehistory. Even if Bigfoot religiously burned every trace of his ancestors before burying them, there would still be evolutionary traces of some sort of ancestor, a proto-Bigfoot, in the ground. There are of course other good arguments that don't help Bigfoot's odds of existence either. Why haven't natural disasters like floods and landslides produced at least a few bodies of the creatures? And where are the remains of those who died by accident and misadventure while wandering in the forest on their own? Why has he never run amok in a small town like a scared deer or elk or moose? Why hasn't he been shot? A fair question in America that could be said of many things. He would have to be preternaturally alert to be able to escape all distinguished and dog-eared human scientists at all times. If, say, a tenured professor of anthropology were to see him and take a photo as proof, the whole game would be up. So far as I know, none yet has. If such a professor had such an encounter and failed to raise it for academic discussion, he or she would be guilty of dereliction of scholarly duty. If they did raise such evidence, their reputation if not their livelihood would be on the line. Making false eyewitness statements, such as with a hoax, highly unlikely. They would have to be taken seriously, and none are. Some Indian legends that enthusiasts have pointed to as proof should be taken with a grain of salt. Indians often wove tales about monsters and the bounty they discovered around them, as did the people of ancient Europe or Asia or anywhere else, and they freely incorporated dreams and hallucinations into their stories. In other words, their accounts are as subject to the subconscious finagling of the imagination as those of modern white men, and quite frequently more so. Without books or the scientific method to guide them, they used what they found in their immediate vicinity and relied on their own imaginations to make logical connections. The evidence against him preponderates, but still the trees shift as I pick my route through the half-lit glades, growing only darker with each bend in the hiking trail. The Skookums are as alive and real as they ever were tonight. Lack of evidence be damned. The Birdseye Lowdown. I am preparing for a busy weekend of hiking and people watching at Cape Lookout on a beautiful 4th of July, my first of many holidays to be spent on or immediately next to the beach. It has only been a few weeks since I arrived and it is all shrink-wrapped, everything I see and everything that happens. I'm halfway out the door and down the steps of my trailer, in over-optimistic swim trunks and a beach towel slung over my shoulder, when my cell phone rings. It is my sister. She is about to tell me her father has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and wreck my weekend. She is about to send me on a crash course about that particular cancer and its survival statistics. She's about to do a lot of things to my life. Warning signs of pancreatic cancer are varied, so diagnosis often lags. My father, whose attitude with his children as well as with himself was that we were all incapable of getting sick. I had pneumonia the entire summer of 1987 before he at last prescribed for me antibiotics, ignored the problem when he felt a gnawing ache in his stomach until the pain at last became unbearable. By the time he was diagnosed, the cancer was already well advanced. The 5-year survival rate is 5%. 3/4 die within a year, although it is relatively rare. Not even in the top 10 among the various types of cancer within the United States, it is among the most lethal forms of the disease, and receives the least funding for research. There is a fundamental quality to this lifestyle, full-time slow travel, that cannot be ignored and that becomes its greatest asset on days like these. even as it is a great annoyance to one's physical comfort. I live outdoors. I am never far from nature. I can, and do, go out into it all day and much of the night when I can find the energy, and there are few things more energizing than impending tragedy. On Oregon beaches I can hear to think, free of visual noise and enveloped in a cozy constant hiss and ionically charged particles kicked up by the surf. They do not suggest topics to contemplate, but are blank spaces into which I put my own thoughts, to turn them over and look at them closely and without distraction. In Oregon mountains, on the other hand, I am constantly reminded of my own state of living. My heart rate and perspiration and aching joints never allow me to forget that I am alive. So I go hiking into the mountains on the 4th of July on a bright, cloudless morning. From the blinding glare of the beach I ascend several hundred feet into the cool haze of a rainforest. South-facing exposures reveal a sunny holiday down the coast, but at the apex it is like a jungle. Among the trees that make their own rain, the Cape is surrounded on 3 sides by nothing but clear sky and open ocean. The atmosphere on Cape Lookout on such days often becomes iridescent in the fog and half-lit swales. The effect is both warm and coldly clinical, like a sick bed in a hospital. Indirect lighting rung the mark. At times, it is very helpful to have a rainforest nearby. The constant need to keep an eye on the slippery ground and the rain out of it causes me to plod carefully with my head down, so that as a result passers-by can't see my face, which is just as well. The thing they would see there would be mistaken for effort on this wild, wet trail rather than what it actually is. Here is the best reason to live near a rainforest. Some days the rain is necessary. Sometimes the rain can't be done without. Octopus trees and nurse logs. William Clark noticed them. I observed in many places pine of 3 or 4 feet through, growing on the bodies of large trees which had fallen down, and covered with moss and yet part sound. After a tree falls in the forest, and the resulting log and stump, called a snag, becomes a sponge, and is as efficient at storing and transporting water in death as it was in life. Remains of healthy trees, especially slow to decay, serve as lifeboats through the ocean of time for a host of things: bugs, fungi, mosses, bacteria, algae, mushrooms, bugs of every sort and the birds that feed on them. They are known as nurse logs for their beneficence, providing succor for trees that will themselves become nurse logs in time. They exist only in the wild. Log forests have none. In a recent study, nurse logs contained on average over 20 gallons more water per volume weight than the soil around them. A young tree gets a boost from the year-long nutrients that are delivered to it by roots anchored in a nurse log, squeezing the sponge as it grows, wringing every advantage, but is also thus propped above the forest floors that become swamps in winter, and above the leaves of ferns that block out light. The tree gets plenty of water and sun but not too much. Drift logs on the beach that wash up as convoluted masses often have nurse log pieces tangled in their roots, which, now overturned, still show the frozen embrace of their long-decayed benefactor. Logs washed up as a result of logging always lack these signs, all potential nurse logs having been hauled off with the rest. Only trees that grow freely in nature show these empty arms. Dangle a dead octopus in the extremity of rigor mortis, flash freeze it, and turn it upside down. and you have a rough approximation of an octopus tree, rather than a main trunk from which branches diverge. You see an array sprouting from a nearly common point. The young tree has been trimmed repeatedly to encourage a division of growth vigor. Indians may have tended generations of such trees, perhaps even in groves. They served a utilitarian purpose according to some historians, as handy spots near the sea to store canoes. In autumn, canoes were strapped into the crotches of the branches of such trees to keep them above the winter storm surges, so they would be waiting when the Indians returned the following spring. There is also speculation that the trees served a religious purpose. I'm not completely convinced that all of the trees that many consider to be octopus trees are necessarily so. As unlikely as it may sound, a series of accidental amputations could also cause a tree to branch chronically, as can a superabundance of nutrients and sunshine in a young sapling with a primo spot, like the campsite I had when my neighbor ran face first into his psychosis, thus causing the profuse branching at low altitudes seen in octopus trees. Moreover, it seems an inordinate number of species in this climate are able to repair themselves prodigiously, like muscle that heals back stronger each time. Tommy John surgery for trees. The basic shape speaks of nothing so much as the violence of the winds. It is not hard to imagine that Indians may have taken the idea of training a sapling to grow as desired as an inspiration when they applied the principle as intimately as they possibly could. They bound tightly wound tourniquets around the skulls of their children, tightening the bandages such that over time as the children grew their heads became elongated, football-shaped objects, and signs of aesthetic beauty. Meriwether Lewis describes it. The most remarkable trait in their physiognomy is the peculiar flatness and width of forehead, which they artificially obtain by compressing the head between two boards while in a state of infancy, and from which it never afterwards perfectly recovers. This is a custom among all the nations we have met with west of the Rocky Mountains. I have observed the heads of many infants, after this singular bandage had been dismissed, or about the age of 10 or 11 months, that were not more than 2 inches thick about the upper edge of the forehead, and rather thinner still higher. His traveling companion William Clark was interested in something else in his description of Indians with large legs and thighs which are generally swelled from a stoppage of the circulation in the feet, which are small, by many strands of beads, or curious strings, which are drawn tight around the leg above the ankle. The Indians of the northwest coast, like the inland tribes, certainly understood the malleability of youth. Bigfoot 2, Bigfoot Come Home. Indistinct creatures lurk in the dunes. A pair of lumpy brown silhouettes cause the shadows to move, a rustle of shore pine branches. No, the shore pines themselves. The whole trees shiver in the fading evening glow. The two shapes lumber out of the tree line and stomp down to the beach, as uncaring as debarked tourists. A stench of death and rot surround them and blows toward me. I am here in the dunes too, but it seems they cannot see me, or perhaps they don't want to. It is the end of the tourist season and I have been left alone on this beach, to confront alone the twin things crouching low in the surf now, rubbing bellies and breasts and sinewy arms of matted hair, bathing in salty water and washing out untold varieties of filth. They seem not to see me, but I seem not to see them. Mutual blindness. I have to scream but I can't, for I have no mouth. One of the creatures stands and twists its form to glance in my direction briefly before his eyes lock on. He has me now. He sees me and I sure as hell see him. I see Bigfoot. That it is a hoax doesn't matter. That it didn't really happen but in a dream, has been invented in my subconscious of the whole cloth of movies and books and television shows, and the darkness around me is beside the point. It is how I imagine my encounter with Bigfoot going down someday, here in the particulate fading beach light at low tide. For my purposes, the fantasy is enough. There is value in the ability to pretend for a while at least that everything is not as it seems, that there is far more at work here than the eye can behold, and that the only reason we don't know is because we are unable or unwilling to ask the right questions. I prefer the possibility that Bigfoot might exist to a definite answer either way. If I saw Bigfoot with my own eyes, it would be a disappointment because in my mind at least, where I decide how I am going to see the world and where the limits of possibility might lie, the myth will be gone. It is my ability to redefine the limits of my imagination, indeed, if any need exist, that matters. A failure of the imagination being the worst kind, it would be far worse. Worse even than being wrong, to be unable to imagine the existence of Bigfoot at all. This attitude seems disingenuous to me as I write it. I know the Bigfoot legend can never be fully disproved, and to see it proved beyond scientific doubt would be a spectacular confirmation of the limitless possibilities of nature. But the myth of Bigfoot has become a myth in itself, and provides an iconic archetype. The American seeker, the earnest soloist who in the face of scorn and shaky evidence is convinced that all is not as it seems and we must come to discover where we got it wrong and why, that the truth is really out there somewhere, lurking in shadows. There are seekers so dedicated that after long cold nights stalking him through the forest, and dry dusty days chasing his clues up mountain paths, they come to resemble the very creature they seek. There is, I'm sure, a lesson here too. If a remnant population of creatures from Asia managed to recently make a way to North America, and if they ritualistically burned the bodies and bones of their ancestors, the lack of evidence in the fossil record might not be the deal breaker it first seems. This sounds like nothing more than idle speculation and wishful thinking, but then, of such things are legends made. The suggestion that given the activity of hunters and campers in these forests some of them must surely have seen the creatures if they were here, has two problems with it. Firstly, they have been seen. Reports of sightings most frequently come from these people. Second, from what I've seen of them, their general lack of observational skills and the acuteness of their misunderstandings about nature and how it works, a weakness common to many of them. I see no special difficulty involved in hiding from them. They are loud, unobservant and impatient as a whole. If an intelligent human with good survival skills could easily hide in these dense and brush-screened forests, surely a creature, especially one with the speed and intelligence Bigfoot is claimed to have, could pull it off. Not knowing the truth about Bigfoot really isn't a problem. The evidence each way is drawn in the margins of the virtual doodle pad of the thought experiment involved. The legend is a doodle made of fuzzy stick figures, a skookum, or thing of no lasting consequence. This legend is fun, and fun it shall stay. Bouquet from a stranger. I am in a foul mood as I arrive at my campsite. I estimate it is about my 250th. All told, I am tired of traveling in the constant movement. I've got long-term motion sickness. It is late spring again and I am cold and wet and tired. as much so as the gun-barrel grey sky. I have been watching it all day as it has systematically snuffed out every potential opening, killing in the womb every chance at sun. But I discover the bouquet of flowers that has been thrown into the fire pit, what is now my fire pit, at least for a while, at the moment that a sudden glimpse of daylight descends and lights it up for me in a quick flash of bright yellow and withered green. And it has not been thrown but placed upright in a plastic cup half filled with rainwater. It has simply fallen over. It has been deliberately left here where I, whoever I might be, will find it. Campsites are places rented to the public at large for the purposes not only of sleeping here, but of living here. This makes campsites similar to hotel rooms in a way, except that the sites once they are vacated are given only a fairly cursory inspection. There's not much to it, by a campground host before it is ready for the next set of campers. Things get left behind by accident sometimes, but the bouquet is another matter. It has been left deliberately for me. The hosts, if they visited this site before I arrived, chose to leave this bouquet rather than throw it out. The remnants of other campers are everywhere, and every time they are unique. Many are collected on the beach and forgotten, abandoned, or simply not taken home. Sand dollars and shells, driftwood, rocks, strands of seaweed and kelp, plastic and styrofoam fishing floats and water-worn nylon nets. Most of the man-made artifacts are fairly benign and related to food, tobacco, or booze. Some are more eloquent: lost earrings and bracelets, hairpicks, barrettes, lipsticks and false fingernails. Girls wear here, or half-melted plastic army men, tatters of comic books, dolls' heads and strategically placed wads of gum, or worse, one or more boys. I watch things decay in fire pits during the dormant winter months, plastic cups turning to crumbly yellow bits and cigarette butts becoming frayed clusters of fibers, partly used campfire wood falling apart slowly, the charred bones of fun, places haunted by memories of parties. This is how it sometimes looks when camping alone in winter time. I set the bouquet upright and top off the makeshift vase with fresh water. The flowers are mostly non-native orchids, daisies, queen anne's lace and various dry twigs are still speckled with dumbbell-shaped seed pods that make noise when I rattle them. It is not uncommon to find improvised decorations picked from nature by campers and left behind, but this one has been professionally arranged, with careful use of tissue paper and colored translucent cellophane. Why someone would have an expensive bouquet of flowers at a campsite in the first place is anyone's guess. Given my accumulated knowledge of such places, mine is that there was a birthday or graduation party, or perhaps a wedding anniversary. Given the color scheme, they are obviously intended to cheer someone up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were sad to begin with. More ominously, the flowers could have been meant as a gift of consolation. The bouquet seems somewhat superfluous in this place at this time of year. Wildflowers choke hiking trails, rhododendrons are fully ablaze, and cheerful orange salmon berries dangle from bushes. Snacks for a wild array of bugs, birds, and kids newly freed from school for the summer. I repurpose the bouquet in accord with an ancient Pacific Northwestern tradition and recycle it. These are my flowers now. I once discovered a dream cache that dumped remains of burned bits of wood and rubbish into a gold mine for the amateur archaeologist of very recent history. Rangers periodically dig the accumulated ashes, and all else that campers have dumped into fire pits over the months and years, from all the sites in the campground, and the rangers at this one have disposed of it all on a remote service road that only recklessly wandering campers like me would ever discover. One of the things I find is to my imagination dripping with significance, mystery, and despair, but it just as easily could have been a random accident, a stray spark from a campfire that landed in the wrong place. For example, perhaps something so funny it was elevated to anecdote status. Remember that time we went camping and my school books went up in smoke? What catches my eye are the fluttering pages of a book with a charred spine. Black bits of pages sheer off in a swirling breeze. I pick up the unfortunate book and thumb through the flame-tube prose still stinky with soot. It is a textbook, but it is obviously written for a general readership. It is an introductory text on child psychology,